Welcome to Pathways, a career podcast from the Idaho State University Career Center. I'm your host, Mark Beaver. Today, we're talking with Dr. Henry Evans, Associate Director of Equity and Inclusion here at Idaho State University. Henry's also an adjunct for sociology and poli-sci. Dr. Evans has an extremely important position at ISU. It's important in all institutions like this, though there was a time when he didn't even know that a position like this really existed. Instead, he kind of actually just pushed his way through an undergraduate degree he wasn't really invested in. Though, in reflection on his interests from when he was a young child all the way through, he can kind of see how the path was laid out. Please join us for our conversation with Dr. Henry Evans. Hey Henry, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So, one of the things that I like to do on this show is have people in from offices and programs that maybe not everyone out in the community knows exist or really understands what the function is. And you work for such a vital part of our institution. So I was wondering if you could just kind of tell us about where you work, kind of like a bird's eye view of your job and that department.
Okay. So I work for the Office of Equity and Inclusion, which is located in this rendezvous. Everybody walks by it, but I don't know that they always know where it is. There's a couple of things that we do on the student side. We have our Gender Resource Center, our Diversity Resource Center, and Native American Student Services. So the Gender Resource Center provides programming around gender issues, healthy relationships. Every year they do, for example, the positive body image. Mm-hmm. But those are really geared toward providing programming for students, faculty, and staff around those issues. Then we have the Diversity Resource Center, which provides programming for faculty, staff, and students around diversity issues. So everybody probably knows that ISU celebrates Martin Luther King Day, or Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So that's one of the kind of our big events, yearly events. We do have a diversity week. And we also just have a space, the Diversity Resource Center, where students can come gather. We have a place to study. We put programming on, like brown bag discussions and those kind of things around diversity issues. But it really is about providing programming for students and faculty and staff to try to reinforce the importance of recognizing everyone's contributions, and then together with the Gender Resource Center, making sure that everybody feels seen and valued and can thrive at ISU. Then we have our Native American Student Services that provides advising and programming for Native American students. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the big events that is done through the Native American Student Services is Indigenous Peoples Day, right? So kind of a big event, well attended, super important. So that's kind of on the programming side. Then we have more of the compliance stuff that we do related to hiring and equal treatment related to either civil rights, employment, or again, like Title IX issues, right? Mm-hmm. As the associate director, on the compliance side, I do a lot of work with hiring committees, search committees. And so together with a woman named Lisa Santos, who is our equal opportunity specialist, we work with all of the search committees to make sure that people are trained. We work with HR together as well to ensure that we are effectively recruiting and hiring, well-qualified applicants, and that the process is fair and equitable. Mm-hmm. Right? We also have a Title IX coordinator who investigates Title IX complaints. And we have a Title VI coordinator. That's myself. So if you feel like you've been discriminated based on protected category, race, age, religion, those kind of things, those are investigated in our office, and also employment discrimination cases. So that's a lot.
That's a lot.
And yeah. I don't know it was very helpful. I think.
No, it's good, because I think it's important to know that there are people who are dedicated to each and every one of these issues, right? I think it's important for everyone to know. It's not just like there's a couple people working in HR who are making decisions maybe without the correct background or training. That it's actually like dedicated. There's dedicated people in each area. And I mean, on the programming side, just to make sure that, we are putting on programs that, showcase the diversity of people that we have here and their cultural contributions. But also, like you were saying, on like the compliance side, kind of a lot of the stuff making sure that like is not, maybe someone without the correct training, but actual people who are dedicated to looking into these and do so with proper background, the proper amount of time, things like that.
Yeah.
So
those things are so everything that we do in our office is very intentional. And
exactly. Intentional was kind of the word I was.
And it's very, I'm glad you raised the point of people that are trained. So first of all, it's important to recognize that we work with a lot of folks across campus, or we have committees where we brought together people from across the campus to discuss equity and inclusion. And we have a cadre of Title IX Title IX investigators, for example, and our interim Title IX coordinator, Melissa Milliken, has done a fantastic job making sure that, training opportunities are provided, so that, when we are providing either programming or we are dealing with a compliance issue, that we are positioned to effectively understand what we're doing and engage in best practices. So all of that comes together, I think, to really provide opportunities for us to be positively impactful on the Idaho State University campus.
Right. So I guess like going back to that background a little bit, what kind of background does it take to be in a position like yours? Like what did you study? What kind of maybe just strengths might someone in looking at these kind of areas have, or interests? What would draw someone to here, and what kind of training might they need?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, you can go in as an academic kind of pathway. You can go and get a degree in like human resources management, right? Where you would learn a lot of these issues on the legal side, or even the kind of theoretical side of equity and inclusion and civil rights laws relates to hiring and those kind of things. And actually, the director, Stacy, teaches classes on that. So thinking about my evolution, right? I learned a lot of that, not in that way.
Okay.
So my undergrad, I was a journalism major, and I had minors in French and political science.
Okay.
And I thought I was going to be a journalist. I thought I was going to be the next Ed Bradley. So for you young kids out there, Ed Bradley was on 60 Minutes. He was super cool and had an earring. And my girlfriend, wife at the time, thought he was sexy, so I pierced my ear. But as I studied, I really didn't mind journalism, but I didn't have a passion for it. So I was getting C's. But it was interesting. I started taking political science classes and kind of gravitated toward political science. So I left, when I graduated from ISU, I went to graduate school and studied international relations, and came back. That was at Arizona State. Came back here, went to graduate school, studied political science. And what I found out was that the things that interested me, the stories I wanted to tell as a journalist, the classes that were interesting to me, kind of political theory, and even international relations type courses. I was interested in fairness, social justice, civil rights, those kinds of concerns. And so I think that even though I took a very kind of meandering route to where I am, that when I look back on it, I could see that I was concerned with these issues. I was just studying them in a different way.
Right. Have you always kind of had those interests? Like going back to, is that a through line?
Yeah. It's funny. So I was just talking last week to the Bengal about a podcast that I do. The podcast is about reggae. And the story I was telling was that when I look back, that there is kind of a consistency in terms of interests. And so I was born in 66. And so I'm growing up just after the civil rights movement. And the conversations in the communities that I was a part of always revolved around those issues. And then the music that I listened to as a kid was what people would call message music, right? So Stevie Wonder, Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions, even albums that didn't necessarily always lean toward the political, usually had a track that resonated with me.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if it was because of that early exposure of those conversations or something else, but that was something that I was always interested in. What I found was the older I got, And the more that I learned, the more able I was to identify what it was that I was trying to do. So I didn't always have the capacity to talk about what was interesting because I didn't have the lexicon yet.
Right.
But yeah, so I think that when you think about how it is that you wind up where you're supposed to be, I do think that there's oftentimes something pushing you that you may not be able to, or pulling you that you may not be able to identify, but it's probably, when you can look back far enough, you can see that there is actually something that
Sure.
the cosmos is trying to tell you that you should do.
And I think it's really hard in the moment, like you're saying also, without the lexicon, right? It's hard to be reflective in the moment,
Right.
really, and it almost takes a little bit of that being able to reflect and maybe connect like a few pieces. Yeah, I think it was really interesting that you said that, because you've been talking about, like, it's kind of like a through line that was just below the surface
Right.
for you, maybe, right? And I like that you were saying that you don't have the lexicon, you didn't have the lexicon to really be able to realize that was maybe like a driving force. Right. It was more of like that interest. 'Cause, I mean, I think that, we were talking before we started recording about music, and I think I had a lot of the same thing, and I was telling you that in college, and people who listen to the show have heard this, I had a sociology class. It was the first sociology class that I'd ever had, and I also was attracted to a lot of music that had like pretty like political or strong messages, or even like the one track on the album that maybe was a little bit more politically aggressive. And, for whatever reason, at the time, I couldn't really put a finger on. And then when you have something that can kind of give it context, right? And then all of a sudden it gives you that lexicon because there's a little bit of context. Oh, this is putting together all these pieces now. Now I can kind of put together, like, and then it's starting to become more and more powerful to me. Now I realize maybe why that was so important to me. And, it almost, you can see that through line start to extend. So, but that's really hard in the moment, right? So,
for sure.
So like, how would one kind of achieve that? Just like constant reflection?
I don't know. So, yeah, I mean, I'm old enough now that I can think about those things, but I certainly wasn't doing that, right? Yeah. And like I said, I didn't love my choice of undergrad major, but I was afraid to change it. So I just did it because I thought that that's what I was supposed to do. And then I always say it's the process of negative decision making. But I don't know that I was moving toward anything in particular. I knew I was moving away from things. And I think a lot of people do that. You have an idea or a thought, and you're just like, I don't like that. That pushes you to another place. And then you have another thought, and it pushes you to another place. And that ultimately, right, it's kind of like whittling away extraneous stuff so that you can get to the thing that you're trying to do. But what would have been helpful for me is for someone to ask why you're doing it that way, because I felt like I was oftentimes spinning my wheels, and it took me a long time to get traction. I don't know that I was able and even ready to have that conversation, though, because I was also kind of pigheaded, right?
Right.
But I think that, looking back and thinking about telling somebody else something is like, I think when you're uncomfortable, and it's okay to feel that, and to then say, okay, what is it that I'm really interested in doing? And you might not even know what that is, right? Rather than, just keeping your head down and trying to slog through it, because I think you waste effort, and I think you waste opportunities. Like you were saying earlier, we were talking, a lot of times you don't know that there are positions like the ones that we have available to you until you get in it, right? So, yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. And all those experiences were important because they taught me some things about myself and some things that, helped me figure out what I liked and what I didn't like. But I certainly would have liked to have the capacity to sit back and be a little bit more strategic in what I'm trying to do.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Dr. Henry Evans, Associate Director of Equity and Inclusion at Idaho State University. Yeah, I think, what you just said is scary for a lot of people. It's scary for you, right? Especially once you're in to a certain point, maybe in a degree or even in a job or a career where you've just kind of put your head down. I'll push through. I'll hit a stride. It'll be fine. And, if there's a balance, right? Like, I mean, with journalism, you can kind of at least whittle it down, as you eloquently put it, which I liked, to kind of get to what interests you, at least. Then you can use everything that you learn about that interest can be kind of transferable, possibly, to other fields. But I mean, there's other situations where you can just put your head down and try to drive through, and you're just going to be, once again, as you said, spinning your wheels. But at some point, you're just going to be high-centered, and it's going to be really hard to get out of that situation. So, I mean, yeah, there's a really fine balance there, I guess. So, as you said that, so you stuck with journalism all the way through your undergrad.
I did.
But the whole time you were kind of at least focusing in on some more interest areas. And then did you go to a master's program, or did you go directly to like a doctorate program?
Went to a master's program.
And what was that?
It was at Arizona State in International Relations, and I did not finish my master's there.
Okay. So what was that transition, and how did that, like, how did everything kind of evolve from, I mean, like, what was step one to step two as you went from journalism to where you are?
So I graduated and I worked for a year in a job that I completely hated.
What was that? I like these. I like these.
I worked for a store. I got a bachelor's in mass communication.
Mm-hmm.
I had a minor in French, had a minor in political science. I had, for me, a good GPA, which is a 3.1, 3.2 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I spent a year, first 6 months I spent selling lottery tickets. Literally standing up and selling lottery tickets, scratch tickets, because they had just come out. And my first job was to explain to people, how do you know you won? For $4 and some odd cents an hour.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, like, wow, this sucks. Because you think, okay, I'm supposed to, I've done everything correctly. I got the degree and I couldn't get a job. So I worked there for a year, planned to go to graduate school, went to Arizona State. But I hadn't, again, in terms of being strategic, because I knew that I wanted to get a master's, but I didn't, first generation student, I really didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
And it was difficult because the questions that I was interested in asking were kind of obtuse. So I was there, and then I came back to Idaho State, and then I got into the doctoral program here.
And what program was that?
The DA in political science.
In political science.
Yeah. Right. Great professors. And actually, one of the guys that we were talking about, those moments when you go, oh, okay, this is something that interests me, and this is something that I should be doing. Had a professor, two classes we were talking about classes that were kind of impactful. One was sociology, one was philosophy, and we read the Trial of Socrates. And the professor Levinson, Dr. Levinson, was a phenomenal lecturer. But I remember the Trial of Socrates and like finally having this kind of revelation of it's about how you ask the questions and what knowledge is. Because I had spent so much of my life trying to figure out why I didn't understand things the way that other people understood them, and I realized that it was kind of a different series of life experiences which gave me a different perspective. Because I felt that if everybody else gets it, if I don't get it, then I must be stupid. Then I had another professor, Rick Foster, in political science, and he was the first one that I can remember saying, you don't have to agree with me. And those two things were like...
Yeah, that's amazing to hear.
Incredibly liberating. So that's when I think I kind of opened up and said, okay, there are some things I'm interested in, and I think that I have some insight to some things, which, it really were the two things that moved me toward asking the questions that I asked in terms of study, which leads me directly to what I do now, because I was interested in, like I said, understanding civil rights, applying those lessons to contemporary issues. And I continue to do that.
And you're saying that was like you kind of, looking back, that was always kind of there. But I mean, I think you said something very interesting that like you maybe were wondering like, why don't I understand these things other people seem to understand? You have you come from a different perspective,
Yeah.
perhaps. And I mean, that sounds to me like having that kind of frame of reference or knowledge could be extremely helpful in your position now,
Oh, yeah.
working with students.
Well, and even in terms of like, getting a job, like there are things that, I would always say, what am I not getting? Right.
Yeah.
And now looking back, recognizing that, there were some skills that I needed. And I needed also to be willing to, in the moment, because we talk about being in the moment, sit down and say, okay, what do I need to change?
Mm-hmm.
And what skills do I need to develop? And I was hard-headed, so I didn't go to places like the Career Center and say, okay, help me figure this out, right?
Neither did I, ironically, now that I work. Yeah.
So I would just fight through it. That kind of manifested in a weird sense of insecurity, where then, because I wasn't sure about my employability, I probably stayed in places too long instead of being willing to, say, okay, what do I need to do to make the next step, right? And that's one of the things that I tell my kids, and it's one of the things that I always tell young folk. I'm like, just in general, I'm like, it's okay. Go ahead and take a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you fall on your behind, there's always, hopefully, you have a support system, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes that's the only way that you can make the next step, right? None of us learn to walk by very few of us learn to walk by just standing up and going. We fell a lot more.
Right.
So, yeah, looking back at that, that's very interesting.
When you talk about, taking that time to step back and kind of assess, like, maybe what are some areas where I have some weaknesses, some skills I might need to build up. Do you have any memory of like what some of those were and how you went about that?
Yeah. So the best thing I ever did was finish my dissertation. When I was finally making progress, I'd love to get sidetracked into very interesting things, but I had to put my research questions on my screen. And then I would say, oh, that's interesting, but I'd have to ask myself, like, is that what you're doing? Like, is that the research question? So sometimes what you have to do is you have to just make sure to maintain focus, right? And then there were times when I was working through that I think that people can feel as though they're open-minded but be incredibly closed-minded to things. And I was that person. So philosophically, I could talk to you about why it's important to, maintain critical perspective and all this stuff. But then people would say very concrete things about this is what you need to do next. And I'd be, oh, well, that's
right.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but you don't understand why this is important.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so I had to really reconcile myself to the ways in which I got in my own way with my inability to really stop and take in advice.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
my inclination is to always take the advice and act as though I'm in a class and say, oh, that's interesting. Well, what about this?
Right. Yep.
And sometimes that's not how life works. So, that. And like I said, sometimes the thing, I had a professor tell me one time that it's about having a steel behind. He says sometimes the smartest people aren't the ones that get done, or the most successful people aren't the ones that have the best ideas. They're the ones that they can sit down and make real the ideas that they have, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So he said you have to have a steel behind, and I didn't really get that until, because I always wanted to think big thoughts, and sometimes I still do that, right? So when I talk this, one of the things I always tell students, or any person, I was like, okay, no, don't take this the wrong way, but I'm like, anyone who's listening, don't take this the wrong way. But sometimes I'm like, it's very easy to assume that the person in charge was the smartest person, right? But I was like, there's a good chance that your boss or supervisor or professor or whatever, that somebody in their class was like, I can't believe that this person's in college.
Sure.
So, it's about trying to make real for some people as well, right? The idea that all of this is attainable, right? Because when you assume that person is just
like a deity, or
exactly,
just get like touched with this brain or whatever, right?
Then it's very easy for you to say, well, I can't do that, right? And as soon as you say, you give yourself that little bit of wiggle room, then I've seen it quite often where that little bit of doubt is all that takes for you to not try your hardest, right? Because so when you realize that, you could be that person,
right?
I think that makes it much more attainable.
Right.
So looking like try to, if I were going to wrap this up, I don't know how much time we have, but because I talk a lot, but those are the lessons that I've learned, right? And in looking at how I try to program, I always want to, I try to program in ways that allow people that space to ask those questions or to wrestle with those issues. I'm always suspicious of folks. I'm always suspicious when it seems like people have already decided this is what the answer is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would rather have them say, here's something, let's talk about it and try to move collectively toward that. And I know that that's a slow and messy process. But I think that that's the most successful process, right? Again, thinking about the way, like when I talk about how hard-headed I was as an undergrad, that's what I needed for somebody to do to me, right? Is sit down and say, okay, well, you're in this program, but I'm not quite sure you really, like, are you loving this? And if not, what is it that would take it, what is it that you need?
Yeah.
How can we structure this so that it's, more successful? Or if this isn't the right program for you, it's okay for you to move, right? It's okay for you to do something else. That's what we try to do. That's the critical lens I always try to bring to the conversations. Even when I do my diversity trainings, I never come in and say, and I haven't done those in a while, but when I do a diversity training, I never come in and say, okay, let me tell you what you did wrong. It's more like, I'm going to give you 80% of an issue, or we're going to talk about this, but the last 20% is for you to close, right? Because that's the important movement, right?
Right.
Anyway, I don't know what that has to do with anything, the price of tea anywhere, but that's right.
Well, I think, part of this is to understand why this is all important, why this is a part of our piece. And I think you said so many things in there. Like, there's a lot of people who don't see themselves in certain positions because of the backgrounds that they have come from. And so as someone in your position, you can kind of bridge that not only for our students, but also to the faculty and staff, and to kind of open up that door of like, hey, here's something you may not have known about some of these backgrounds. Here's something you don't know about some of these, about what certain people are going through. And you can bring your own experience to it. And the same ideas of like, for your students, like, let's be open, but still be critical to the people who work here. Hey, look at all these different perspectives that are coming in. How can we move forward?
Yeah.
Like folding these into what we already know. That's just, it's a slow and messy process, which has been the case of our nation. And, but it's an essential process. And without offices like yours, without people like yourself, they wouldn't be done intentionally, kind of going back to what we started as.
Yeah.
So, I think it's just incredibly important for people to understand like the why of why a lot of these things are here, and that they're not just, being handed down from a higher person in that organization, but that this is a piece of our fabric of our institution.
Yeah. I think that in our office, we're pretty lucky that we have a lot of lived experience, right? Like, people aren't just doing this because it's a job, but it's, it's important. And we recognize, as well as, because of that, we recognize that we have an opportunity to give back, to make a positive impact, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, I always want people to know, there's nothing, well, there might be something special about me, but really it's about the community, But I always want to tell people too, it's like, if I can do this, anybody can. Like, if I could, get through this program, if I could be an administrator in a position like this, because you talk about representation, that's really important. Then anybody can. Like, that's,
Yeah.
your horizon is as vast as you want it to be, right? But, I also know that there are some things in terms of, if I could alert people to some of the mistakes that I've made, I hope to do that, right? And a lot of that is, I think that it's never a problem. It's never bad to sit and think about how can you be more strategic in getting where you want to go. Have a plan.
Yeah.
And then, check with some folk about how that plan's put together. But you got to also be willing to you got to be open to feedback.
Yeah.
As my mom would say, sometimes people won't tell you what you want to hear. They'll tell you what you need to hear.
Yeah.
And so you got to be willing to have those conversations. And that, on the office side, we're just real people, man. We're like everybody else. The great thing is, I've had jobs where I just could not believe I have to get up and go to work tomorrow. Like, I can't believe I got to go there. And we deal with some pretty rough stuff sometimes. But there's never been a day where I dread going to work because of the work or the people.
Yeah.
Right? No, there's been days that I just don't want to get up because it's like -10.
Sure.
But I generally enjoy the job, generally enjoy the people, and know that everybody is doing their best. And ISU's better for it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in and talking to me today, Henry.
No problem. Thank you.
And that was my conversation with Dr. Henry Evans. I really liked what he said about letting your guard down in a way and opening yourself up and hearing those things that you need to hear, or at least seeking out someone who can tell you something that you need to hear. So many of us have a hard time seeking out or taking advice, especially when we have a goal in mind. It's important, as he said, if you're able to, constantly try to reassess what's really important to you. Reassess what's at the heart of what you're doing. And then use that to kind of look at the goal down the line. That's how you can really kind of find an area that's going to be fulfilling to you in the long run. If you're more interested in your career path, please visit the ISU Career Center website at isu.edu/career. Likewise, you can listen to all our past episodes of Pathways on Spotify and YouTube, as well as kisu.org/pathways. You can look out for live Pathways every second Wednesday of the month at 7:30 p.m. on KISU. From the Idaho State University Career Center, this is Mark Beaver, wishing you a fantastic rest of your day.